She will start.
Hi, everyone.
Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you all for being here. We recognize it's been a long day after a long 250 days of COP, it feels like. So thank you very much for being here with us. I promise this event won't disappoint. It is worth being here. We're very excited to share a lot of outputs from Regen 10 with some great panelists to talk about those outputs. My name is Tara Sham. I am the director for Regen 10. Regen 10, for those of you, and I'm looking at many familiar faces, so I know many of you know of Regen 10. We are a multi-stakeholder initiative aligned around a common goal to develop a shared understanding of how regenerative and agroecological approaches to food systems transformation, really with farmers and landscape actors at the center of that transformation, can deliver on positively for nature, for people, and for the climate. We're comprised of currently 13 institutional partners, but a network of networks with many, many more partners around the world and growing. So I get the easy job really tonight because I get to stand up here, welcome you, and hand over the heavy lifting to Danielle Nierenberg, a familiar face to many of us in the food system space, to moderate our panel. So thank you all for being here, and thank you, Danielle.
Thank you, Tara. Yes, please give her a round of applause. She deserves it for all this great work and the 250 days of COP that you've already enjoyed. I want you all to give yourselves a round of applause for being here at 6:35, I think, 6:35 in the evening. Round of applause for yourselves. Thank you. So again, my name is Dani Nierenberg. I am the co-founder of Food Tank, which is a research and advocacy nonprofit really devoted to highlighting stories of hope and success in food and agriculture systems. And that's why I'm excited to be moderating this panel. As Tara said, this regenerative landscape work is so farmer-centric. It puts farmers really and other landscape stakeholders really at the center of this work, and that's what's so exciting to me. It's very people-focused. So I am excited to discuss that landscape transformation for climate, for nature, for people, and for culture, which I think is such an important and often neglected part of this. So I am going to just quickly introduce our panelists. Please join me in welcoming Irish Bagalat, the coordinator at the Asian Farmers Association for Sustainable Rural Development. Give her a round of applause. We have Sarah Shear, the president and CEO of EcoAgriculture Partners and chair of the 1,000 Landscapes for 1 Billion People project. Give her a round of applause. I also have to give a plug for Sarah Shear. Food Tank would not exist if Sarah Shear hadn't been my fiscal sponsor. So another round of applause for Sarah Shear. Rupert is a partner and co-lead for Nature Food for the Nature Food team in Europe at Systemic. It's been a long day. He is joining us via Zoom. Can you say hello, Rupert? You're muted, sir. Or we don't have, there you go.
Hello, good evening, everyone. I'm just a few kilometers away in a hotel, so hopefully the connection will hold up.
Those blue zones passes are tricky. Thank you so much for being here. And finally, Willem Verwade, the founder of Commonland. So give him a round of applause, please. And again, I just want to congratulate them before we start this panel for their excellent work, really making Regen 10 possible. So thank you. So Irish, I'd love to start with you. First, I mispronounced your last name very badly, I'm sure. So if you'd like to re-say it, that would be great. But you know, what we've been talking about this whole week is the huge threat that the climate crisis poses for farmers and their livelihoods. And they're not just facing the climate crisis, they're facing a biodiversity loss crisis, a public health crisis, conflict, and so many other things. And so from your perspective, how can collaborative landscape level actions enable farmers across Asia and elsewhere to be key partners in climate action while also helping them build their resilience and really improve their livelihoods?
Yes, thank you, Danny, and also thank you for the organizers for giving us this platform, to speak for ourselves. So first of all, I am here on behalf of millions of small-scale farmers, fishers, herders from 22 national associations and agricultural cooperatives in Asia. And also, personally, I am also an indigenous person from the northern part of the Philippines, where you can find the first GIAS site. So yes, to respond to that question, I just want to say that because our livelihoods rely heavily on weather and climatic conditions, we actually don't have much option but to adapt to the realities that we are facing now. And at some level, we try to protect, our source of income, our livelihoods. But we know also that adapting our farming activities to the current climate realities, while at the same time transitioning to a more climate-friendly, climate-resilient farming system, we cannot do this alone. And for example, we did some consultation among our constituencies before we came to COP, and one of the things, that I mean, many of the things that we have gathered, for example, the unbearable heat that our members are experiencing because we work in the field, it makes us adjust our daily activities. Increasing intense rain, stronger typhoons, unusual pest occurrences. This has been reported, especially in Central Asia, in Kyrgyzstan, and also part of Southeast Asia. Weeds becoming more difficult to manage and control. This was also expressed by our members in the Philippines. And of course, the rainfall, the changes in rainfall, these are the realities that are being faced by our constituents. And it is within this context that landscape level collaboration becomes necessary. And moreover, we want to see it as an opportunity for us to be recognized. Now, when we look at the whole landscape, we want to use that as a platform for us to be recognized, the public good that we do. We hope that that will be recognized. And of course, when we use that landscape approach, it also has a bearing on the sustainability of what we do. Of course, we rely on water. We rely on organic materials to bring back the life in our soils. And as I have mentioned, I am from the northern part of the Philippines, where you can find the Banawe rice terraces, where we have protected our watershed so that we can continue producing rice. And also, we want to use it through landscape level collaboration. We want to use that as a way for other actors to understand our realities, while why some farmers are still having challenges in transitioning. So I think when we look at the whole landscape, we cannot avoid having difficult players within a platform. And also through landscape level collaboration, I think our organization, our social institutions will also be recognized, because it takes governance, bringing together different actors. So we want to see it as an opportunity to be equal partners with the other actors within the landscape. And I think when our value, what we do, the food that we produce are valued, I think the support needed for us to build our resilience will be much closer to where it is needed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Irish. There are 2 points that I think are important that you brought up. That it's no small thing for the adaptations that you, as farmers and fishers, need to make. You talked about heat, flooding, and pests. These are all things that are very difficult for farmers to adapt to without being part of a collective, being part of an organization. And you also reminded us that farmers are not just food producers. You're providing public goods, public benefits, ecosystem services that really benefit us all, benefit the environment, and benefit us all as people. So I'm wondering if you can explain why farmers' organizations are so important to the regenerative work, and why it's important for governments and researchers to be able to work with you as farmers' organizations and recognize the value that you have.
Yes, so it's through our organizations that we are able to consolidate our voice. So especially in the decision making processes, I think that's one, and it's also through our organization where we can engage in the bigger market. No, it's through our cooperatives that we are able to really negotiate, no, with the bigger actors in the market. So it's also through our organization that we build our capacity. And I think what is really relevant now with the multiple crises that we are experiencing is that our organization is closer to us, so they can really, respond during crisis. And if resources are given to farmers organization, they are much more, closer, to the farmers. And I think what I want to emphasize is really when we want to do it on scale, if we want to really transform in scale in a shorter time because we are in a hotter climate, then I think it's it's strategic to do it through farmers organization.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Sarah, Irish mentioned the really important work of building collaborative processes for farmers to be engaged in so that they have that united voice. And I'm wondering, based on your experience, what does successful collaborative landscape action look like?
Thank you very much, Danny. And I actually want to call out the Philippines, which is where I first learned about landscape work from indigenous land care programs. So that's also really cool. I wanted to start with a little story from one of the landscape partnerships that we have worked with for 20 years. At EcoAgriculture Partners. This is the Lari landscape, which is in the central highlands of Kenya. It's one of the last remaining natural... Closer? Thank you. Please tell me to do that. So it's one of the last remaining natural forests in Kenya. It's also one of the most important sources of water for the cities, Naivasha and other cities belowhand. Very high biodiversity area. It's also mainly low-income smallholder farmers dominate the population. They produce tea, they produce vegetables, food crops, a little bit of dairy, this kind of thing. And it's very near Nairobi, lots of potential, but really poor and poorly set up to try to take advantage of that opportunity. In 1994, a group of youth got extremely upset by the degree to which outside actors were coming in and destroying their forests. The government didn't seem to be able to do anything about it. So they took matters into their own hands, and they actually formed a partnership with the Kenya Wildlife Service and the Kenya Forest Service, and mobilized all the farmers locally and the community members to start protecting and preserving that forest and to do reforestation. They did this for quite a while until around 2006. It started in 1994. They realized that the farmers and the communities were doing so much work, and they actually weren't getting benefits for themselves. And so they sat back and they said, well, wait a minute, we need more than the environmental organizations in this group. Let's actually have the farmers organizations representing themselves as producers and as other actors. And so they dramatically changed the approach that they used. And they started this community organization called the Kenya Environmental Volunteers. And they started to do kind of really basic things, helping with seed and helping with, a little bit with marketing and trying to figure out what farmers really wanted. But over the next 15 years, bit by bit, they started to do more and more really interesting things. They developed a landscape labeling program and marketed the products as a place that's from this really iconic, beautiful, beautiful mountain and clean water. They worked on community-based ecotourism activities. They helped set up a bottling plant. They made partnerships with local banks to finance and provide credit for eco-friendly agriculture. They did small-scale dairy. They brought in some biodigesters, and sort of bit by bit, they really brought so much in, and they started getting partnerships from national museums of Kenya to do biodiversity monitoring and all sorts of other groups that came in. They now have partners that are quite savvy at fundraising, at finance, at payments for ecosystem services. Over the years, they managed to do this. You can look at this case study if you go to www.landscapes.global. We got a really nice multimedia case study of this. Other landscape partnerships are very different from Kenvo in terms of how big they are, what their focus is, how the way that they're organized, the role of different actors in them. But it's a very good example of what it takes to develop a landscape partnership. Over the last 20 years, they have developed to be holistic, working actively in all four returns. Human well-being, healthy nature, regenerative economy, they're slowing forest degradation, scaling watershed restoration, eco-friendly businesses, eco-friendly farming, and inspiration for collective action. It's one of the most exciting community activities with music and dance and all sorts of activities. And they've implemented the 5 key elements of integrated landscape management, which are forming a strong landscape partnership, having an integrated assessment of the landscape by all the partners, not bringing in an outside consultant, but for them to do the analysis themselves, maybe with some inputs from some outside consultants. The third element is building a long-term vision and strategy for getting there, at least 20 years, some do 30, 40, 50 years, and then a rolling set of action plans with all the different kinds of projects, commercial projects, government projects, community projects, farmer projects, et cetera. And then getting financing for all of those in the different dimensions they need. And then monitoring, learning, and adapting from what they're doing. So that's been really exciting. And in these cases, farmer groups played a really critical role. They weren't the only stakeholder, but they played a critical role. And the other groups came together to support the farmer organizations in some really powerful ways. So this discussion brief that we did together between 1,000 Landscapes and Regen 10 was a really exciting process that we started here. And I wanted to take, if I had just one more minute, to just describe a little bit of some of the key findings. Some of the key findings from this initiative. What we first put forward is, what are the ways that landscape partnerships can support the transformation to regenerative food systems? And there are basically sort of at least 4 key elements. One, you start to look at scale from the very, very beginning. You bring key partners together, and there's 100,000 farmers in that landscape. You won't do them all at once, but you start making strategies for 100,000 landscapes. Secondly, you have an explicit effort to steward the ecosystems, which are critical underpinning for agriculture and food systems. You mentioned the management of environmental disasters is really critical. Having some good seed isn't going to help you if your entire farm gets flooded off or if you lose it in a landslide. The third, mobilizing strategic allies who may be more powerful than you from a political sense to try to get action. Fourthly, to help in managing the complexity, risk, and cost. You don't have to do it yourself. You can do it with others. And so we concluded in this that to harness the potential of holistic landscape management for the transformation of regenerative agriculture, that 5 key things needed to happen. Almost done here. The first one is building the strong landscape partnerships that include leadership from the food system. Secondly, investing in landscape-wide ecological restoration and natural and green infrastructure that supports the regenerative food systems. Third, mobilizing innovation in business, policy, and finance to support coordinated, synergistic investment in the landscape. Fourth, participating in deeper reflection and dialogue about what this new system is going to look like at a landscape and at higher scales. And finally, designing metrics that reflect both the diverse aspirations but also common goals. So I hope you'll take some moments to look through this at some point and continue to give feedback on it and refine our shared understanding.
Where can people find the brief, Sarah, that you mentioned?
They can find it at the Regen 10 website. They can find it also at the 1,000 Landscapes website.
Well, and that leads me to, and there's a QR code. Great.
There's a QR code right there. You can take a picture of it with your phone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So that sort of leads me to my next question for you, Sarah, which the 1,000 Landscapes initiative is sort of this way to catalyze all of these relationships that you're talking about, all of this good work that's happening. Can you talk a little bit more about it?
Sure. 1,000 Landscapes for 1 billion people is a collaborative. Willem over there is a key co-conspirator, together with Rainforest Alliance, Conservation International, the Silicon Valley Tech non-for-profit, Tech Matters, and also the United Nations Development Program, which is probably the largest funder of landscape work in the world at this point. It started because we were all seeing these amazing landscape partnerships. and nobody was supporting them. They couldn't get technical support. They couldn't get respect. National governments and companies would just come in and do their own thing. They didn't respect the 5 years of work they'd done on developing a landscape action plan. And they really couldn't get financing to get to scale. So we said, how can we join together in a radical collaborative? We're not a project, we're not a legal entity. We're a platform for bringing many, many organizations together, aligned around a vision for how to support landscape partnerships. And there's another 40 partners, and we've been spending the last 3 years co-designing with 22 landscapes a series of things, elements that we think will, and they have told us, will help them to be more effective and to scale. Some of those include a really unique digital software platform called Terrasso, and everything on that's been triple tested, quintuple tested with farmers, super user-friendly, open source, all of it for free, in terms of helping them use data and resources. A second element is the development among a large number of organizations with decades of experience in supporting landscape partnerships on capacity development. And it's not by training courses, it's by learning modules where the groups learn together, the entire partnership works together, and it helps promote the kind of dialogue and the kind of interaction that deepens understanding, deepens trust, and co-design the outputs that they can do. The third area we're working on is the development of a landscape finance accelerator. These are really, like I said, really hard to finance, and we're developing a series of tools and sort of expert coaching, short-term expert coaching to help landscape partnerships look at their action plans, figure out what is and isn't investable, how can they make them investable, and figure out what kind of financing strategies they need. And the fourth area we've been working on is supporting national coalitions of landscape partnerships and their allies for joint learning and for policy. So we're doing the only other thing I'll add to that, we are also working on landscape finance system transformation, and I encourage you to go to the website of any of the 1,000 landscape partners and sign on to a letter to finance leaders and an action plan to try and start working on that transformation. So I'll just stop there.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And I think it's clear that scaling regenerative food systems to the landscape level can, be transformative, right? But I also know that it comes at a lot of cost and long-term investment. So I'd like to bring Rupert back into the conversation and ask him about this, because Rupert, we've learned, through reports from FAO and others about true cost accounting in our food systems, and global agriculture and food systems cause a lot of hidden environmental, social, and health costs worth at least 10 trillion, which is nearly 10% of global GDP. So can you tell us a little bit more about the costs of these transitions to regenerative food systems and how we can overcome them?
Absolutely. Thank you, Danny. So I think the first thing to say is there's been quite a lot of costing done at farm level on how these transitions are going to look. And indeed, there's a growing body of evidence from people who've been doing them, including the great work that the 1,000 Landscapes Collaborative has been bringing together. And we're typically talking in the hundreds of dollars per hectare per year. So it varies a lot, but keep that number in mind. Sort of $100 to $150 per hectare per year over a number of years is the kind of investment that we're asking farmers to make to shift to regenerative practices. And typically, the more you go towards the deep regenerative end of the spectrum, agroforestry, for example, the more you have to invest up front if you want to get the ecosystem benefits down the line. So we've got that farm level information. On the other hand, we also now have these global estimates. So FAO, the 10 trillion of hidden costs, that really mirrors some analysis we did a few years ago with the Food and Land Use Coalition, coming to a very similar number. We've also got estimates from the Global Alliance of the Future of Food, just came out last week, which supported by some of our philanthropic friends in the room, that put the cost worldwide of a regenerative agricultural transition in the range of 250 to 430 billion a year, every year between now and 2030. So those are huge, huge numbers. So how do we bridge between this $100 per farm or per hectare, something you can relate to, to these sort of telephone numbers in the hundreds of billions that are really, really hard for us to relate to, although one relevant stat might be that they're about half the volume of farm subsidies per year. So if you took the EU Common Agricultural Policy, the US Farm Bill, and so on, and turned half of that into Regen Ag specific support, you'd have solved the problem. So what we did over the last few months is look at this analysis at landscape level instead. We took 5 landscapes and said, what's it going to cost at the aggregate landscape level if all the farmers embark on transitions that improve the environmental performance of their farms without compromising the long-term economic viability of those farms. And so we looked at 5 case examples, and these are drawn from the literature and drawn from our partners, and we're going to be publishing it in a few months. So you get to take a closer look then, just a sneak preview for tonight. Of the 5 landscapes we looked at, very, very diverse set of landscapes, large-scale soy and cattle ranching in South American country, dairy in Europe, potatoes in Europe, rice and wheat systems in South Asia, corn and wheat systems in U.S. Great Plains. And whilst the initial investment costs vary, they're all in the range of sort of 7 to 15% of the farm's profits have to be invested into this transition for the first 4 to 5 years of the transition. It then starts to break even, and by years 6 to 8, you've actually made your money back. So on the one hand, that's really encouraging because it shows that this regenerative system can be profitable and can be economically attractive. On the other hand, it's still a challenge because we're often talking about family farms that don't have the ability to borrow, or even if they do, they face very high interest rates. And so this might be a bit theoretical for some of them. Plus, we are assuming here that the whole landscape is transitioning at the same time, and that there are markets for any new products that they might be putting into their crop rotations. For example, if you're introducing an agroforestry system, we are assuming here that there is going to be a market once the trees are mature for whatever fruit or timber or nuts those trees are producing. That isn't always going to be the case. When I visited the great state of Wisconsin a few months ago and talked to farmers who were trying to diversify out of dairy and out of corn and soy into agroforestry and into regenerative grazing, one of the major challenges they spoke about was that the people buying fruits, buying nuts, even buying oats, are simply not interested in the small volumes they have to offer. They go to California, which has much bigger volumes for fruits and nuts, and they go to Canada for the oats. So there are some practical obstacles here. But let me try and draw a few conclusions from the work we've done so far. So first, we can turn a profit with a regenerative transition after 4 to 5 years if the transition is started in year 1. If you smooth it, if you spread it over more years, you might be able to reduce the upfront cost, but not always, because some of it's lumpy, acquiring new items of machinery, for example. And the payback period usually is within 6 to 8 years. Which of the practices are economically viable? Well, so crop diversification does pay as long as there's a market for the rotation crop, and that's tough in the corn and soy system in the US, which is super optimized around corn and soy. It's actually much more viable, for example, in the South Asian landscape, where there is a growing demand for pulses because of their recognized dietary benefits and also growing export markets. Cover crops also appear to be economically viable, although there is a labor cost to planting cover crops, which is going to be relevant in some areas. Most of the pathways do require some upfront expenditure and profitability drops. So once we talk about moving beyond the farm level, or actually doing this at landscape level, that's why we need to think about integrated programs of support and financing to the farmers and land stewards going community by community so that people can do this together, and benefit from technical support from agronomists, but also financial support from agricultural lenders and off-takers. So in the next round of analysis we're going to do on this, we're going to start looking at the different financial mechanisms that are available to underwrite this transition. And we also want to get more specific about what some of the environmental benefits are that we see from the transition in terms of the carbon impacts, the nature impacts, and the impacts on the resilience of the system. So hopefully that's clear, but happy to expand on anything and take questions.
Thank you so much, Rupert. That paints a picture of how difficult this can be, how long it can take, how expensive it can be. But the benefits, Wilhelm, are extreme, right? They're very high, and even though the transition can take a while, there are ways to get there. And I'm wondering if you can talk about those ways to get there and what Commonland does to help support that. Do you have a mic?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for being the host here, and that I can share some of our thinking. Yeah, we are a proud partner of 1,000 Landscapes, and we are also a partner of Region 10. And what we bring to the table actually is, when we started Commonland, is a narrative. So I came from the world of conservation. And if you've seen, this is the food building here, but on the other side we have the building on nature, which is crazy. There is a building on nature and there's a building on food. These things should be together, of course. So when I started this thinking, I realized that the conservation world has set up the ecosystem approach already in the year 2000s, which was endorsed by COP5 in Amman of the Biodiversity Convention. And those 12 principles of the ecosystem approach are super holistic and super integrated. They're beautiful. But the problem is, it is jargon and it is theory. So it was never been able, we were not being able to really, let's say, make it hands-on. And you know, when I was working at IUCN, I realized that this language issue became a barrier when we were talking to farmers or indigenous people or entrepreneurs or finance people or even governmental people. And I wanted to break down this jargon in a language that normal people could understand. So if you go to a very degraded landscape, you talk to farmers or business people or governmental local people or people like me who are living in the landscape, or like you, because we all live in landscapes. But a degraded landscape is characterized by losses. And if you bring it down and make it simple, you see 4 losses. You see, first of all, you see, of course, a loss of biodiversity and water and all those environmental things. The second loss is that you see people moving away because communities are being displaced or abandoned, villages are abandoned. So you see a kind of social loss. The third loss has to do with income. It's a financial loss, because degraded landscape don't produce. But maybe the most important loss, what I realized when talking to farmers, was the more inspirational loss, the purpose loss. People lost their purpose and were not proud of where they came from. And the word loss is super important. Everyone understands the word loss. Financial people understand it. Normal people like us, we understand it. And there's another word associated to loss, and that is risk. If you have more losses, the risks will go up. Financial people understand it. We all understand that. And we are talking every day about risk, climate risk, social risk, environmental risk, war risk, food risk, etc. So the word loss and risks are critical here. Everyone understands that. And then, of course, if you want to move towards a restored landscape, you need to think about, what do you need to return? And here the word return came across. And if you want to characterize a restored landscapes, it delivers actually 4 returns. It returns inspiration, which is the most important return. And the beauty is the abbreviation of return of inspiration is ROI. So you have a language tool to talk with financial people, ROI, return of investment. But return of inspiration is more important. It's the first step towards return of investment of a landscape. The second one is social returns, the third one is a natural return, and the fourth one is financial return. And if you break that down in KPIs, and we did that, we have a whole set of KPIs underneath those 4 returns, you can really measure how you want to restore a landscape with KPIs. And of course, we talk about values. We cannot always put the money behind it, but we can put money behind it from a risk perspective. So that's the first thing. Each restored landscape is delivering 4 returns. But to do it right, you need to understand what a landscape is. And here the zoning comes in. That is place-based. Most people who live in landscape have no idea where they live. They don't understand ecology because most people are there's a lot of analphabetism on ecology. So you need to bring ecological thinking in their thinking. And also for farmers and for a lot of people, you need to think in zones. So what we did is we split it in 3 zones. Each restored landscapes has a well-balanced situation between a natural zone, which consists of protected areas, watersheds, or areas that need to be protected, or ecological corridors that connect to protected areas. That is number 1. The second one is the combined zone. That is a place where before it was a chemical situation of chemical agriculture, but this is the place where you combine biodiversity with productivity, food and fibers. So here, regen ag or agroforestry or rotational grazing comes in. And the third one is the economic zone. That's a place where people live, work, where you have hard infrastructure, processes, plants, and so on. People want to produce their stuff in their own landscape, not too far away, because that means more income. The last thing which is critical is, of course, time. And coming from an organization like many of you, where you are dependent from philanthropy or for public funding or investment, time is mostly maximum 5 years. 5 years does not work in the reality of our work. So we said minimum of 20 years, which is 1 generation. So 4 returns are delivered in a 3-zone approach in minimum time frame of 20 years. And then, of course, we added, thanks also to Sarah, the process elements. To do it well, you need to create a partnership, a local partnership. Quite often it already exists. And create a shared understanding. We use the theory U to make that happen. And through a shared understanding and a visionary quest, we create a landscape plan. We call it the 4 returns landscape plan. And with that planning system, with all those people involved, you start doing it. And that takes time and it costs money. And we now, after 11 years, we're working in more than 23 countries. We started in 4. South Africa, Spain, Australia, and the Netherlands. We have an Australian friend here who was one of the founders of Wide Open Agriculture, the first listed 4 returns company on regen ag in the world. And so these things we've learned a lot. What is the idea of the 4 returns framework? First of all, we want this to be the intel inside of the upcoming landscape industry. Is there a landscape industry? No, it's not. There's not such a thing, but we're here together to make it work. Is there a transition from fossil fuels to alternative energy? Yes, there is. We were talking 20 years ago about moving towards an alternative or a new sustainable energy system. Now we need to move also towards a landscape industry. And the landscape industry needs to have a narrative that people understand. So our ambition actually is to have this narrative to become the intel inside. We know there are lots of thinking behind it. You can find it on the web. We don't have a QR code, by the way, but we could make one. But the beauty is that after 11 years, we have seen now in 23 landscapes that people understand that, and increasingly, thanks to 1,000 landscapes in Region 10, we are hoping to move this further into, let's say, into the public and private domain, so that governments as well as corporates and the finance industry can work with it. And maybe next year at the COP16 in Saudi Arabia, we could make this even more, known to the world as part of that desertification COP. So that's my story.
Thank you so much, Willem. You bring up some interesting points. I love this, ROI to ROI, the return on inspiration, the return on investment. I feel like when you're trying to communicate that through this great storytelling that you have, but it's still going to be hard for the investment community to understand why they should put money towards this, even corporates. And it looks good in their annual report, but how will it make actual transformation happen? And this is really a question for all of you. How do we convince the finance and investment community that this is cool, that this is sexy, that even though it's going to be 15 or 20 years from now, or 4 or 5 years, that it's worth it? Sarah, maybe go first since.
If you had told me 10 years ago that the level of interest in the finance system would be as high as it is right now, I would have been shocked and said that it's impossible. I'm still not quite sure where it all came from. It's still a very tiny proportion of the finance industry that's looking at it, but I actually think that climate change was the biggest driver. The recognition that actually their investments are not safe. And I think that the businesses feel that way, the banks feel that way, the multilateral actors feel that way, and they're sort of going, okay, how are we going to de-risk our investments? How are we going to be ensured that they're sustainable? Well, I guess it doesn't really make sense to invest in a fishery if all the water sources are so degraded that the fishery goes out of practice. One of my best friends, that happened to him in the United States. So can I count on that? And so I think as the metrics around sustainability have gotten better, as the risks from climate have gotten better, there's a theoretical interest by impact investors and multilateral development banks. I would say still in the large-scale commercial banks, you're not seeing it yet. It's the groups that can, philanthropies coming in, but it's largely at an experimental level right now. And we really need to the current financial system will not fund integrated landscape investments. So it'll fund pieces of them. We've got some great projects, but if you're in India and the river is no longer running year-round, and everybody in every industry is dependent on the river, you actually need the people in the protected areas, the smallholder farmers, the largeholder farmers, the local rural settlements. They all need to invest in ecological restoration, or none of them will be vibrant. So I think you're starting to see this happening very widespread at an experimental level, and what we need to do over the next decade is turn that into more of a mainstream trend, I think.
Sarah, do we have time? Do we have time to do that?
I'm
we have
tired.
a decade?
Institutional change takes time. I'm sorry, you guys. It takes time. I don't want to see, oh, we're going to have this goal, because I'm old enough to remember that we set these goals back in 1975 and in 80 and 85 and 90 and 95. The young people are surprised when they see books that I have on my shelf that are from 1980 that predicted all of this climate change stuff. It is not new. And we're in such a rush that we don't do it right. And so doing it right means engaging everybody in it. It means doing the hard work of talking to one another about why your perspective is one way and mine is another way, and really supporting innovation. So I'm not worried about like setting time targets. I'm worried about doing it right and not Band-Aid stuff, not just practices, not just seed, not just plant trees. How do we transform our ecosystems? That is not easy work. So let's not think it's not, and we need to change all of our institutions. Next year, no building next door to us in nature and agriculture here.
Absolutely, absolutely.
That's what I would say.
Irish, I wonder if you could comment from a farmer, a personal sort of farmer's perspective, and someone who represents a coalition of farmers around this idea of looking at this over the long term, making short-term investments, convincing the finance community that this is something worthwhile, but looking for the long term, because you're farming for the 7 generations ahead of you.
Yeah, I think lots has already been said. I think the fact that you are asking that question, I mean, we are all here to answer. I mean, all the answers to that question, I think we have heard it from the different sessions that we have listened to. But I think for AFA, we are part of a network, a farmers forum, and for us, we look up to our champion, the IFAD, International Fund for IFAD, and this is the support that we just few days ago we have asked IFAD, like maybe IFAD can support farmers organization to be able to navigate this thing, the how we can access finance, how can we convince financial institution to actually invest in the transition that we need to do.
So important to have those international institutions really putting their money behind these kinds of efforts. Willem, I know you wanted to make a comment about what's needed to really move this forward for the finance and investment community to get involved.
Yeah, no, I'm with Sarah, of course. Lots of things are happening. You hear it every day. There are a few barriers, of course. For the finance industry, the barriers who will guarantee the capital, and here the governments will come in. So this is actually about government policies. This and it is about risk. So if you talk about money and long term, the capital, you will see the loss immediately. So governments need to come in. That's why we push hard on government involvement and set the boundary for these kind of frameworks to really make it happen. Because what we have seen so far in our experiences is if you really want to make this change, you need, for instance, to have 500,000 or 1 million per landscape per year to make the transformation possible, to create the space to make this happen. If you do that well, you create new businesses, you create new ecological corridors, and new flows of money will come on board. But the investment community is, of course, risk averse. But this is all about making sure that you understand the risk, and the risks are about billions and billions and trillions. While if you do it well, if you start now with government policy and with support of philanthropists and local actors, you really can make out of an area like in Spain. We're working in 1 million hectares. We have put in 1 million per year, more or less, on landscape management and practitioners and so on, small projects to make the whole thing ready. And if you do the calculations right, that landscape can produce billions and billions only from regenerative ag, but also, because you build a water table again, you reforest, you reconnect, you create an industry maybe in that landscape on tech of people, youngsters who want to come back. So all those things, you need to do the math right. And the last point here is polarization and depolarization. We have wars everywhere. But what our experience is if you start to create or to beautify a landscape and work with that vision, and this is about hope and purpose, people start working again with each other in such a landscape. And they tend to forget the differences in opinion. And that's why it's so important that we do this in rural areas where you have a critical element between people who are almost fighting with each other. It is also a kind of process for peace. And that's about return on investment, isn't it?
That's beautiful. Thank you. I want to turn to questions from the audience now because I feel like this has been such a rich discussion. So I think there's a roving mic right there in the back. So anyone who has a question, feel free. I'm also open to comments if you keep them short. But I hope for real questions for the panelists. I'll get up and give you mine.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. This is Charlie from Consumers International. It's really interesting to hear about this process of this landscape approach, bringing in all these different actors. I wonder, to what extent do you think that bringing in that consumer approach, especially within local food systems, that final point in the puzzle, really interesting to hear your thoughts, Sarah, on that challenge of of doing it right, of not focusing on speed to the extent of getting it wrong. I think there can be a risk sometimes in regenerative agriculture, agroecology spaces to think a lot about how to get farmers to shift, how to do things better, but not quite making that last piece. And it only works if people are eating the food, people are buying the food. That whole system is there. So really interesting to hear about how that fits in.
Thank you for bringing in the eater's perspective. I'm going to hand Sarah my mic.
No, your question is right on. We've been doing this at EcoAgriculture Partners for 20 years, and we actually couldn't figure out for the longest time how to bring consumers in, because there was literally no mechanism by which a consumer could choose sourcing from a sustainable landscape, one that was unsustainable landscape, because it wasn't about the food, it was about the system in which it was growing. And I think we've got a lot of tools now that are enabling that to happen. The landscape labeling movement, which is still very small, I think is very interesting. Obviously the certification movement, but most certifications at the farm level, and you can certify a biodiversity-friendly product, but the biodiversity will still be gone if all the other actors in the landscape are destroying it. But what I really love about Region 10 is and a lot of the talk here is the thinking of the whole food system. And I think a lot of landscape partnerships that we started working, and maybe also true with you Willem, they did start with, it's basically farmers, environmentalists, local governments, maybe some infrastructure people. And when you start to broaden it out and bring in people who are investors, people who are in businesses, bring in agribusinesses, bring in the consumer groups, all of a sudden the context changed. There's a really interesting case that we have a few sentences about in this report from Ohio, where the Ohio Smart Agriculture Group came in and they sat together. They have really high malnutrition. If you don't know that, it's one of the highest malnutrition states and one of the biggest agricultural producers. And they said, let's get us in the same room and let's do innovations in our system that will help low-income consumers and help producers at the same time and help the environment and clean up the water. So I actually think having consumers' voices in there could be game changers, especially if the consumers are sort of vocal.
Any other questions or comments? Million, you got it? Okay.
Thank you very much. Excellent presentations. Few questions to Sarah. Your story is a beautiful story about the protection of that forest and the community's motivation to protect that forest. I know so many communities would compete with those who are cutting the forest rather than organize themselves to ward off, the attack. What was the motivation of those communities to do that is my question. And William, I really liked your presentation and also this 18 years perspective. I was working with the local community, so I know very well that 3, 5, 7 years won't work. It's a long-term project. But what I was expecting, you've listed 4 kinds of returns. I was surprised that I didn't see cultural returns, Instead of talking about biodiversity or nature, we talk about biocultural diversity. Because people's culture depends on biodiversity or the nature, and nature depends on people's diversity. So why not cultural returns as one of the 5 returns? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Do you want to address that, Willem?
Very quick one. 4 is understandable, 5 is too much. That's why. So the cultural one is under social. And because, someone here in the room once told me that simplicity is complexity resolved. And if we make it more, we are very good in making things complex. I'm coming from the complex ecological jargon world at IUCN. If we make it more complex, we will understand it, but those folks out will not understand it. And so when we talk about culture and pride, it is under the inspirational and social return, and especially, by the way, under the inspirational return. So, hope it's an answer. We can talk after with the drinks.
Thank you so much. Sarah, did you want to make some comments? Sure.
One of the things about the kind of landscape work that I think Willem does and that we do and that most of the partners in 1,000 Landscapes do is not about having external people tell people what's important in their landscape. They have a voice and they've got a critical voice in there, but it's really, people do not do this hard work for things that matter to other people. They do the hard work for things that matter to them, and the power of it is getting people together and say, I'll help you, farmer, if you'll help me with the environment, and you'll help me with infrastructure, and you're gonna help me with government regulations, getting that better, and building on those kinds of things. So in the place, this particular case, there was tremendous pride in place, and tremendous fear that outsiders were coming and taking it away. So that was in this particular, we work in other landscapes where there's a lot of conflict within a landscape. Some want to keep it, some don't want to keep it. And then it's really a conflict resolution multi-stakeholder dialogue process that has to go in there. But you've got to start with what matters to people, not what their solutions are, but what their issues are, and then co-design the solution so that it provides benefits to more partners. That's kind of the principle.
Thank you so much, Sarah. We're sadly, one more, go ahead, nope.
Just one question. Where do you start? Because if you have a government where the extension system is broken and you have many actors all over the place competing, not cooperating, and the farmer is just trying to survive on their own, they don't have really serious farmer organization. who starts this? How do you start this kind of thing? Yeah.
Sarah Irish.
Yeah, I'll respond from the farmer's perspective. So, although you mentioned that what to do, in the context where there is a weak or non-existing organization, maybe Sarah can answer that. But from the perspective of farmers' organization, so one of our agenda within our organization is really capacity development, not capacity building, because the capacity is already there, among the farmers. They are, as I have said, we are already innovating, and we start from there. So for farmers organization, we actually have different approach. We have master trainer, for example, in India. So they are trained and they are actually paid. They also gain from training fellow farmers, and also we look for champions, and then we organize farmer learning circles. So those are some of the strategies to train, to build the capacity of our farmers to transition from conventional to sustainable agriculture or agroecological agriculture. And then some of our members are also providing whole economic services. So they also provide credits and loans to their members to be able to actually transition and invest into their farms.
Yeah, there's two aspects. I do want to emphasize the huge difference there is in trying to do a landscape approach when there are organized farmer groups and there aren't. It's just a lot more difficult. And I think investing in the long term in these groups and the kind of investments that Willem was talking about, I actually think is really important. There are places where people manage to bring in farmer voices into co-design without those, but it's just harder. But one of the key things right now is leadership. These things happen when there's a core group of 3 or 4 leaders from different sectors or different groups, and they commit to make this happen, and they bring people on, and they inspire people. I think that's always going to be important, but I actually I think as we institutionalize support for landscape partnerships, it could be that somebody goes to school and says, hey, I'm going to grow up and become a landscape, I'm going to be a landscape leader, and I'm going to get skills for being a landscape leader. But there's some very wonderful examples around there, and I am going to give a pitch that early next year, anybody who wants to start developing a landscape partnerships is going to have actually a lot of tools and resources from 1,000 Landscapes that can help them begin that process.
So stay tuned for that. Sum up very quickly.
One very quick, yeah. So landscape leaders are landscape conveners. So they're out there already and they have the answers. Sometimes what's lacking is the right tools and the right language. And of course, creating the space, and so that means funding to make that happen. But they are already there. We don't have those answers. They have their answers. What we can provide, and we as 1,000 Landscapes, Commonland and others, is the tooling and of course the funding or through funders. So it is not a question of where to. So the question where to start is quite often it has already started, but you need to embrace what has been started and convene that with others to make sure that it continues.
Thank you so much, Willem. I want to thank this amazing panel for all of this great work that they're doing. Congratulations. Please give them a round of applause. It is now my pleasure to invite Nico Jansen, the Program Manager for Agricultural Livelihoods at the IKEA Foundation, to take the stage. This work would obviously not be possible without funding from the philanthropic community. So along with the IKEA Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation has been fundamental to this work, and most recently the McKnight Foundation has come on to support it. So thank you, Nico, for concluding us and sending us off into this evening with some inspiring words.
Thanks, Danny, and thank you in return for the excellent moderation and your willingness to step into this. And first of all, I think thanks to all of you, indeed, for being here this late in the day with us still. I'm probably standing in between the networking and drinks that you're all looking forward to and have well deserved, I think, after a long day again of sessions and talks and meetings here at COP. At the IKEA Foundation, I think we are very proud and thankful to these partners sitting in the panel, but also for many of you sitting in the audience. that are working so hard to transform the food systems and on landscape collaborations. You know, without all of you, we could never do this. We're just, as I often say, we're just a simple funder in the game. We have the easiest job. And indeed, thanks, of course, also to Rockefeller and McKnight to be with us in this game and having the courage to roll up our sleeves and start doing this. And we believe that caring for health of people and planet must go hand in hand. Willem, you're totally right. You know, the nature and food needs to be in one pavilion in the future. So let's commit to that we're going to do that. But this is also why we think it's so crucial that we're discussing this at COP, that food systems are part of COP. We know that it's not just a poverty issue, it's a climate issue. And it's more and more and more a climate issue. So if we don't curb this landscape degradation trend that we see happening all over us the world, you know, we're not going to win the game anymore. So we have to keep ourselves, you know, to stay within that 1.5 degree, but also to keep achieving the SDGs like zero hunger, and they're interrelated. Hunger drives climate change. Poverty drives climate change. So last year we came to COP with Region 10. We launched it last year at COP as an initiative, and we promised to come back this year. So here we are. You know, we promised to come back with results, with outputs, and I think this is one of the key ones. So thank you very much, Region 10 and 1,000 Landscapes, to come together. You know, to start to collaborate, and indeed not to compete, but to collaborate. You know, and to find answers to how we can do this and how indeed we can jointly learn and enrich each other's stories. And we hope going forward that many more will join. We even had to make a bigger room this year because last year it was too small. So this year we need a bigger room to have more people in here. And we may not have all the answers yet. It's a learning journey also for us and also as a founders, also for you guys being in this game. But that's also why it's so important that we work together, learn together, share the successes that we hear today, but possibly also in the future share our failures so that others can also learn what not to do wrong and go right immediately, because that's how we can win time, I think, in the end. And a lot more resources will be needed in the coming years to accelerate that transformation. Together with the Global Alliance, we have been doing an exercise that we've labeled RAFT. You know, I think earlier last week it was launched, you know, where we're calling for a 10-time doubling down on investment into the food skills. Rupert mentioned the big numbers and the small numbers. But we see there, you know, of that 400 billion a year that is necessary to transform landscapes, actually only at the moment 44 billion is available. So we really need that tenfold in investment to make it work. And maybe partly indeed that money is repurposing existing subsidies, but we're going to need some new money as well into the game. So we're also calling upon funders, financiers, public and private, to embrace this landscape approach and start financing into it, because it is the way forward. Yeah, so without further ado, two things. One, tomorrow is the second delivery of the Region 10. It's the outcomes framework, 2:30 in this same room, so I hope to see everybody back here. And the second thing, thank you and a good evening and cheers.
You all are doing a lot.